development partners actually on the process. Precisely because it is a very complex field, we have tried to capture all of it in some ways through guidelines that you will have received, and they are published on our website, that were published a year ago, just at the beginning of COVID. So we don't talk much about COVID, but the guidelines are good for the rest of the decade and beyond, because they will expose you to all of these new facets and the complexity of development cooperation, both in donor countries and in recipient countries. We also produced these guidelines with our colleagues at UNDP as part of our work with the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, the GPEDC, of which the IPU is a member on behalf of the parliamentary community. So that's just to set the stage for you very briefly. We don't have much time. The event today will be structured essentially in two parts. The first part will feature more a discussion from within parliaments, from the experience of parliamentarians, looking at the capacities of parliament. And the second part and there will be 3 speakers, each speaking for about 5 minutes. And the second part will be even briefer, 3 speakers, 2 minutes each, that will tell us more about the experience from outside Parliament, what support agencies like UNDP is providing to parliaments and how. And we'll have experiences from Burkina, Serbia, Armenia, Georgia, to cite a few. Now, before we introduce the panel, the distinguished panel, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules or guidelines, if you will. If you haven't yet renamed yourself as you enter the Zoom chat call, please rename yourself so that it starts with the country and then your name, so it's easier to call you. You can also use the chat line to introduce yourself if you want to say something about yourself. Also select the language that you need. We have English and French interpretation for this meeting. And of course, we will have about 15-20 minutes for interaction with you, the participant, at the end of the various presentations. And when that moment comes, you can just raise your electronic hand. I already see one up here very soon, to indicate that you wish to speak, and somebody will unmute you when I call your name so that you can actually take the floor. So without further ado, I want to start now with our first presenter, who is a very distinguished senior parliamentarian from Austria, Petra Bayer. She's very active at the IPU on this issue, development cooperation and the SDGs in general. And she will talk specifically with a focus on what she's doing to work with her colleagues in Austria to sensitize them to the various processes and issues of development cooperation. Petra, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alessandro, and a very good afternoon from sunny Vienna. When I have been elected first time as chair of the Subcommittee for Development Cooperation in the Austrian National Assembly, I thought, wow, great. Now it's up to me to shape the development cooperation of the country. Now I really can become involved and decide on what is going to happen. And quite soon later, maybe 2 years later, I became aware it's not within my small subcommittee, which is named development cooperation, but development policy, coherent policy is much more than just development cooperation. And I became aware that committees, and we have more than 40 committees in our national parliament, but committees like science, education, environment, economy, human rights, foreign affairs, finance, justice, even the Court of Audit or Budget Committee are totally relevant for development cooperation. And it's obvious that I cannot become member in all these committees. So the only way how to handle that was to involve or engage my fellow MPs in development cooperation. That means to sensitize them about the importance of development cooperation, to teach them about first the MDGs, which were much more closer to development only, and now do the SDGs, which are not so much on development, but also a task for ourselves in our national policy, but also simply to shape their responsibility on global issues and make them aware that even in their Committee on Science, Education, Environment, or whatever, they make development policy. And so I tried to work with each of them, first in my faction, but also in other factions, about ideas how policy coherence for sustainable development could look like. I sat down and worked on parliamentary questions, on questions to the ministers in their committees, what is relevant for development, and tried to teach them a little bit about this. And to be honest, my indicator after maybe 10 years that I was successful was the moment when the captain of the parliamentary soccer team came to me and said, Petra, we have to buy new dresses for our soccer team. There is something which I have to think about. Is it right? There is something about due diligence, about human rights in the supply chain. What do I have to buy? And when even the captain of the soccer team became aware that in his T-shirts they use for playing soccer with other national parliaments, that has an impact, I know, okay, I'm winning, and really everybody is aware. Not everybody, but most of them are aware now that also they have responsibility for the globe, for the whole world. So, and of course, there are a lot of challenges. For instance, Austria has a very poor performance in ODA. We have not the 0.7, we are far away from the 0.7 GDP, but in 2019 we had 0.27 of our spendings for development cooperation. And even if we had a small increase in the last year, still we are far away from 0.7. And I also struggle a lot since 2015, 2016, when there were many refugees coming to Austria, not to misuse development cooperation policy as something to withhold refugees or withhold people who would like to migrate, because development cooperation is not the instrument to channel migration flows, not at all. So that's really a hard task. I'm still working on that. I also have the problem that our development cooperation, the Austrian Development Cooperation, the ADA, is outsourced, which means when I ask parliamentary questions about the development agency, the ministry often tells me, oh, it's not up to me, it's privatized, and even if they work with taxpayers' money, of course, but I often do not get proper answers, so there is really lack in transparency and not always clear why they are doing what. So I think it's important to use the sustainable development goals to make laws also more development friendly, to focus on, for instance, on working conditions, on human rights, on the environment in the whole supply chain, and that due diligence is really taken serious. I just tabled a motion for the Committee for Justice last week on this, because I think it's so important that countries which consume a lot, which is made anywhere else, really have responsibility to be aware of how, where, and why things are produced with what resources. And last but not least, I think COVID-19 is, of course, a challenge for all of us, but I think it's also a chance. It's a chance to raise awareness for global interdependence. It's so clear that even if there is a virus in Wuhan, far away from us, it tackles us as well.
Thank you.
And we all know that we will be able to overcome this pandemic. Even globally, we will not overcome it at all. So I think it's important to use this also as a trigger to raise awareness for interconnectedness. Thank you
So much, Petra. That was very interesting. I'll come back to it, to your remarks at the end of the first batch. So now I have the honor to introduce The next speaker, in the person of the Speaker of the House of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Bridget Anisette George, who will focus mostly on the internal structures of Parliament and how that is being organized in response to the new development cooperation landscape in her country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, and good morning to all from Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to say it's a pleasure for me to participate in this webinar. I think that the experience of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago typifies the point made in the guidelines that we have the legal framework that supports our legislative, budgetary, and oversight functions. But however, when it comes to looking at development cooperation, our oversight is lacking there, and we have not effectively leveraged the powers that we have to promote the effective use of aid and other development resources. When I looked at our scenario, I think if one asked us fairly, we would say at the Parliament, we have no role in creating the development policy. But while we don't have, as was said by the former Speaker of Australia, while we may not be the ones that design it, we do have an opportunity to influence, to shape responsibilities. And when I look at it, that comes just from the budget. When we look at our budget, which we have an annual statement and we present it with the public sector investment program, we get an idea from that of allocations that the government will be using from grants and funding and borrowings as global figures, but it is there for us to interrogate. We have a very, within our structures, we have a committee system. So we follow the budget from implementation, the pre and post budget. And I think from our committees, we also have an opportunity, not just the financial committees, we have a PAAC, which looks at the budget real time. And I don't think when we look at the budget, we look at really the sources of funding that comes from official financial grants and aid and those sort of sources. But I think it is something that we can look at. And then our other committees, our departmental committees. So for instance, we have a joint select committee, which is made up of members of both houses, which will deal with, one deals with finance and legal affairs. And that takes in both the financing of any ministry, any department, any policy. It takes in the planning of any ministry project and so on. So I think we have to effectively use those committees to look at funding, aid, borrowings. And as the former contributor said, all our funding, whether it comes in the form of aid, grants, comes through the Ministry of the Ministry of Planning and Development. So while there's no requirement for these documents, source documents, to be laid in Parliament, for Parliament to know the terms, the conditions, the objectives, the purposes, it's all there in one central ministry, which our committees can call upon to lay the documents, examine it, look at its effectiveness, look at its targets, see whether these targets are being met. In addition to which, there is a structure where members can bring motions, and these will be backbenchers, can bring motions on national policies to interrogate how is development aid being done? How are we meeting our sustainable development goals? And when motions are brought on national policy issues, the government is bound to answer, is duty bound, and there's a time frame within the standing orders where the cabinet must lay its policy paper before the Parliament. again, we shape in a way how things are done in terms of development, in that there are certain pieces of legislation that have borrowing limits. So let's say for special borrowing. So we have a piece of legislation called the Development Loans Act, which puts a ceiling on the borrowing limits of the government. That was recently extended, but it had to come to Parliament to be debated. And in that opportunity, Parliament will also get a means to interrogate and to shape policy. I think for us, our other structures, which I think exist in other parliaments, where we can ask questions, the interrogation of the government, our private motions, can also assist in us ensuring that the development cooperation is effectively used and implemented.
Thank you.
Our hindrance, as I said before, is that there's no requirement to lay, but I think we benefited from partnerships with development partners like the UNDP. So for instance, we have planned very shortly next month doing master classes on the sustainable development goals to equip our parliamentarians.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome.
I had to bring you to close. I'm sorry, we are almost.
I understand.
Okay, so without further ado, I want to call on our next speaker, who is very involved in the 6 Lusophone countries of Africa, Portuguese-speaking countries. He's a specialist in development cooperation with the UNDP as well, and he will tell us his story of what kind of project is running in those countries to support the parliament. Thank you, and Ricardo Godinho Gomez.
Thank you very much, Honorable Bridget Anizet Jorge, and Speaker, and Petra Bayer, Madam. Dear experts, I think all the protocol was already observed, so due to time, I will just go into the words I want to share with you on the subject. First of all, I'm honored to be among this illustrious panel to briefly share the empirical evidences on the contributions to development cooperation of the PROPALOP TL side. This is the acronym for our program. It's a EU-funded multi-country South-South triangular cooperation program that is promoting the consolidation of public finance management systems and economic governance. The program is implemented by UNDP in 6 countries known as the PALOP TL. We are talking about Angola, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, São Tomé e Príncipe, and Timor-Leste, that is in the Pacific region. I want to congratulate IPU and UNDP and the global partnership for the design of this webinar and the guidelines. If we were trying to do a presentation of the profile of the alignment with development cooperation in our own webinar, we wouldn't be so successful in aligning the two. So my first point is on the total alignment that I consider to be existing on this initiative that is a facility based on South-South Triangle cooperation, and the scope of the discussions that is brought to us through the guidelines that was already presented by our moderator. Our intervention logic, our program started in 2014, in fact, the scope of this program. And we started working with the external controllers of the executive, trying to balance a little bit the ground and checks and balances between the institutions of public finance management that control the executive and the executive. And it is in this scope that we interact with the parliament. So from 2014 to 2017, we focus our work in the 6 countries, including Brazil and Portugal as technical partners, working essentially with the institutions that are responsible for the external control of public finance management systems. We are talking about supreme audit institutions. That was our first output, to strengthen the external control that is technical and jurisdictional on PFM. And we are talking about parliaments on the political control, legislative budget oversight essentially, and the social monitoring of public finance. This was our intervention scope and logic. We soon noted that we needed also to engage the executive and ministries of finance during this first phase. And this is how we evolved from this first phase to the second phase to where we are now. That started in 2019 and is going until 2021-22. Now our program is for the consolidation of economic governance and public finance management systems in these 6 countries, plus the 2 that I have. The new, we are approaching the ecosystem in a holistic manner, so we also engage the Ministry of Finance and the executive in our work. If we look into the guidelines quickly, we would see that in page 5, the guidelines are focusing on the role that parliaments should have on legislative, budgetary, and oversight role in the overall implementation and their contribution to the overall implementation of the 2030 agenda. This is at the core of what we are doing in our third pillar, our third output with parliaments by developing their capacities to go throughout the budget cycle from the formulation until the audit and accompany the implementation of the budget more consequently. We also can see that the SDG 17 that we referred in the guidelines is at the core of our approach. We are using South-South triangular cooperation and partnerships at institutional level involving more than 40 institutions in the 6 countries through community of practices and peer learning to develop the capacities of these important central core actors of PFMS, focusing also on the external controllers of the executive that are given in this case by our parliamentary support, so they can engage in a more balanced way the discussions along the budget cycle with the executive. So this is at the core of what we do. And the third point that also is in your guidelines, of course, is the need to have the parliamentarians and parliaments contributing for SDG 16 and accountable, inclusive, and participatory transparent governance, which we are doing. This is the scope of our work. I think my time is over. This is what I heard. I have to thank you. Or I do.
Thank you. So I'm supposed to sum up these 3 interventions in 2 minutes. Obviously, very difficult. All I want to comment on is the common thread that I noticed between Austria and Trinidad to begin with, where both are from very different experiences with very different levels of internal institutional capacities, are saying that there's still a lot of education to do within Parliament of your own colleagues. So I'm hoping on these issues and the processes that are involved. I was also impressed by the story of Trinidad and Tobago that says basically Parliament can demand to see the breakdown of aid figures, can ask to see the contracts and the procurement agreements and so forth, but doesn't always. So there is a gap between the legislative authority that you have, and then something is almost like pulling you back and saying, no, this is not what we can do, what we should be doing right now. So I wonder to what extent there's also a problem of political will and political forces that don't necessarily agree on the direction of policy that interferes with the actual level of capacities that you have in each parliament, whether it's a donor parliament or country or recipient country. So that's a very interesting perspective that you conveyed. And again, I want to refer to the guidelines that we put out and encourage the 2 of you, particularly members of Parliament, to organize a meeting, and we'll be happy to help you with that, around the guidelines as a way of raising awareness of all the things that you already have the ability to do, only you need to find the will to do. And then there's a separate question of developing the capacities to do it better. So with that, I will want to now start our second round, which, as I said, will be shorter, only 2 minutes, so that we can quickly get to hear from the participants out there, and I see quite a few. Our first intervention, I don't know, can I ask, do we have Alphonse Non? Can somebody suggest? I don't see him. Do we have
Yes,
Alphonse?
yes, we do.
Great. So our first intervention will be from a former member of parliament from Burkina Faso, Mr. Alphonse Non. And as I understand that he will focus also particularly on the question precisely of the contractual agreements that lie behind development cooperation and the kind of oversight that parliament may be able to have on those agreements, and generally issues related to the fashioning of the development cooperation policy as a central pillar of the development cooperation in receiving countries. So, Mr. Alphonse, bonjour, vous êtes là? Mr. Alphonse, I give you the floor. Oui, allez-y, monsieur, je veux voir. Voilà.
Ça y est,
Merci,
vous m'entendez?
Oui, très bien, merci.
Vous
Allez-y.
m'entendez maintenant?
Oui, oui, très bien, allez-y. Vous avez 2
très
minutes.
bien. Voilà. Très bien, merci beaucoup. Il faut savoir que la politique de coopération mobilise beaucoup de ressources pour le financement des politiques publiques qui conduisent à l'atteinte des ODD. Et dans le contexte du Covid-19, la mobilisation des ressources pour la relance économique. Cependant, ce qu'il faut savoir également, c'est que la négociation des traités et conventions internationaux sont du domaine de l'exécutif. Et à ce stade, le Parlement ne peut pas exercer du contrôle. Là où le contrôle du Parlement intervient, c'est lorsque ces ressources sont retracées dans le budget de l'État, la loi de finances. En ce moment, au cours de l'examen de la loi de finances, le Parlement peut exercer effectivement son contrôle. Et en ce moment également, il y a une obligation de l'exécutif de faire un compte-rendu de l'exécution des ressources mobilisées à travers la loi de règlement. Cependant, ce n'est pas toutes les ressources mobilisées par la coopération financière qui sont retracées dans le budget de l'État. Il y a ce qu'on appelle les aides projets qui sont des aides directes. Ces aides-là échappent un peu au contrôle du Parlement. Et c'est là que, nous pensons que il faille que l'exécutif revienne vers le Parlement pour faire la redevabilité. En ce moment, le Parlement pourra exercer son contrôle et exercer également sa fonction de représentation des populations. Voilà donc un peu l'expérience que nous menons au niveau du Burkina Faso. Mais ce qu'il faut savoir également, c'est que quelquefois, même les ordonnances qui sont soumises à la ratification du Parlement, des fois, l'exécutif demande ce qu'on appelle les lois d'habilitation. Les lois d'habilitation, qu'est-ce que c'est? Le Parlement volontairement se dessaisit de sa fonction de législation pendant un certain temps, 6 mois, 12 mois. Pendant ce laps de temps, les conventions de coopération sont ratifiées par ordonnance du chef de l'État. C'est vrai que la fin de l'année, toutes ces ordonnances sont soumises à ratification du Parlement. Mais bon, il faut dire que lorsque ces pouvoirs sont rétrocédés à l'exécutif, le contrôle parlementaire s'exerce vraiment difficilement. Voilà donc un peu l'expérience que je voulais exposer en participant donc à ce webinaire.
Merci, monsieur. Very interesting. From my point of view, we say a lot, we keep repeating in our circles how important it is for all aid to be recorded on budget. But what we got right now is a reminder that that's not enough. There's a lot of fine print that comes with the contracts that are attached to the budget document, and that it takes a lot of effort and investigation for Parliament to actually interpret and understand what the conditions, for example, might be to certain loan agreements that come, or contracts that are signed with extractive industries in your country, and so forth. Thank you so much. So our next speaker will be Biljana Ledenikan.
Merci.
Merci encore. Biljana Ledenikan. She also represents UNDP in Armenia and Serbia. And she will have a very interesting a presentation on the role of digitalization to enhance the transparency of development cooperation within parliamentary processes. Thank you. Go ahead, please, Biljana.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to present the country and regional level examples from Europe and Central Asia region through two parliaments reflecting UNDP support to the parliamentary cooperation in Armenia and Serbia. Our parliamentary cooperation work is, just to summarize it a little bit, is based on trusted partnership with the parliaments because of our non-partisan role, demand-driven programming, and strong ownership. We have applied the same principle when designing the project in Armenia, and we have supported the National Assembly of Armenia with making sure that the parliament is fully involved in shaping, adoption, and implementation of policies. So we have even pushed the process to go even beyond the traditional oversight role, where we have, for example, included the parliament to be part of the shaping of the socioeconomic impact assessment after COVID in Armenia, which was led and usually is led by the government and UN agencies. Also, through transparency, we have established a number of platforms to foster more accountable partnership. Best example of that would be the civil society organizations and National Assembly platform that provides for opportunities for dialogue on current topics, and it is in a way gathering all three branches of power and the civil society organization. Having said that, we have also taken account, based on the various public opinion polls and demand from the citizens, that there is a new reality now in the digital transformation of parliaments, which is opening, in a way, new horizons for cooperation. The main driver for the transformative nature of our work basically is digital transformation. It is innovative, but it's also highly sought after, given the pandemic situation and demand for efficiency and cost effectiveness. It may not work in every parliament, but we will just present our experience from our point of view, and maybe why is it working, for example, transitional parliamentary countries. Through UNDP, Armenia is supporting, in the digital transformation terms, we are supporting business continuity, enabling the parliament to function in very extreme circumstances like pandemic, disaster risk reduction, and so forth. We're in a way enabling web portals for more closer communication with citizens, but also, very importantly, within the digital transformation, but also outside of it, we're supporting the research and analytical capacities of the parliament. And you would appreciate that the parliament who is equipped and who has good capacities for research is a really strong parliament who can really call government to account. Of course, transparency and efficiency come as a result of digital transformation meeting the citizens' demand. There is an effectiveness and accountability that is a consequence of that. We have established cooperation with various parliaments when designing this process, with the Brazilian parliament that was instrumental in piloting digital transformation. We have also been in touch with Swedish parliament, UK, Canadian, Swiss, Scottish, and taken all these lessons learned. So why is this so important? Because we enable faster learning and exchange between the parliaments through facilitation of these cooperation processes. They are taking these lessons learned and enabling a more peer-to-peer exchange and equalization of the parliaments. There are also many other things which we have done, which is cross-party caucuses in other parliaments like Serbian parliament and portal for monitoring digital transformation. I will be here for more questions if you have. Thank you very much for the 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. And by the way, you also gave me a wonderful opportunity, speaking of things, digitalization and things online, to bring to the attention of everyone here, the GPEDC has also a knowledge platform that is available to members of parliament and parliaments as an institution, and that you can find the link that will be posted shortly if it hasn't come already in your invitation. And we invite you all to make use of that platform for to find documents that have to do with your own parliament, with your own countries, and the global community in general. It will be a very good. It's still at a nascent stage. It will grow over the years, and IPU is going to contribute as well as best as we can. So please refer to the knowledge platform and tell all your colleagues and also the staff, very important, because they'll be your first red flag that something is posted that you need to be aware of. Now, I want to conclude with our last speaker, but not least, Sophie Guruli, also UNDP, Georgia, and she will focus particularly on the role of Parliament in developing its own SDG policy over the recent times, and how that process relates to development cooperation. So, Sophie, your floor. You have the floor.
Thank you. I hope you hear my voice well. Well, I will try to very briefly summarize the experience of the Georgian Parliament in contributing to the 2030 Agenda for Development, and our work, the work of UNDP Georgia Country Office, to support the Parliament in this cause. So SDGs have become a topic of interest among the Georgian parliamentarians since around 2017, when the first attempts have been made to analyze the role of the Parliament in contributing to the 2030 Agenda. Through the UNDP Georgia facilitated process, the parliamentary committees developed their multi-year strategic action plans and linked each of the committee objectives with concrete SDGs and nationalized targets to reflect close link between national and global agenda, and this has considerably increased the awareness of the parliamentarians on the SDGs at the initial stage. Later on, the Parliament assessed its SDG capability using IPU UNDP methodology with the support from the IPU and colleagues from UNDP BBBS. And I would like to greet Charles Chauvel. I know he's here, and he has been very helpful for the Parliament in guiding through the process. So based on the results of this exercise, the Parliament developed and adopted the Parliament strategy and action plan for the implementation and monitoring of the SDGs. The strategy is designed around 4 major objectives and certainly focuses on policy making, budgetary processes, oversight, and public outreach. Here I would like to mention that we tried to somehow to increase the level of acceptance among the parliamentarians towards the toward this action plan, toward their engagement in the process. And because of that, the strategy does not try to introduce additional structures in the parliament or try to introduce additional reporting mechanisms, but rather streamline SDGs work within the existing mechanisms, and also demonstrate that SDG is part of national agenda and domestic reforms, and it's not just a standalone program or activity. But unfortunately, shortly after the adoption of the strategy, the political developments in the country, and which were then followed by the outbreak of the pandemic, this has had the major impact on the implementation of the action plan, so that many actions under the plan are yet to be implemented. And speaking of the challenges, I should mention that major shortcoming in the process was at its very outset, when the Parliament was sort of Parliament stayed out, stayed out of the SDGs nationalization process, and certainly this created this lack of the sense of ownership of the process, about which the IPU UNDP guidelines elaborate a lot. But although this has been later compensated by inviting the parliamentarians to be part of the National SDG Council and its working groups. Nevertheless, the MPs' participation at the council meetings is rather limited. And as for the support staff, they lack respective knowledge and capacities to engage substantial in the discussions. So, I will repeat
very good, very comprehensive. I hope we will have some questions for you as well. Now, I might have some questions as well if I don't see enough hands up. So far, I only see one from a gentleman whose name I cannot read. It's all in Arabic. So maybe if you could introduce yourself, sir, and we'll be happy to give you the floor. I'm not sure if, and then Charles.
Salutations.
Oui.
Vous m'écoutez?
Oui, merci. Bonjour, monsieur.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup. Salutations à vous, tout le monde. Je suis Virginie Asdine, député au Parlement tunisien et je représente le Parlement arabe dans cet événement comme membre du Parlement arabe. Alors, honorables mesdames et messieurs, permettez-moi de présenter en mon nom et au nom de son Excellence le Président du Parlement arabe et tous les membres du Parlement arabe à l'Union interparlementaire et à le partenariat mondial pour une coopération efficace au service du développement. Les sincères remerciements, appréciations et gratitude pour leur effort et leur initiative visant à autonomiser les parlementaires du monde entier. En particulier, dans le domaine de la coopération au développement, la question qui lie la coopération et l'adaptation de la science au service humanitaire et l'humanité pour parvenir à une coopération au développement qui réponde aux aspirations et aux désirs des citoyens que nous avons l'honneur de représenter en tant que parlementaires du monde entier. Au Parlement arabe, nous affirmons que si la poursuite du développement durable est l'un des moyens de rassembler et de mobiliser les énergies parlementaires et gouvernementales, tout dans la poursuite des objectifs du développement, alors la coopération pour affronter et combattre l'épidémie mondiale à travers le virus corona nécessite une coopération et une intégration accrue pour faire face aux conséquences économiques et sociales de l'épidémie.
Merci.
Honorables messieurs, mesdames et messieurs, au nom du Parlement arabe, je souligne la nécessité et l'importance de la question commune en tant que parlementaire à partir de diverses expériences et compétences afin d'échanger les expériences et les meilleures pratiques de suivre et de s'appuyer sur les mécanismes et les moyens de relever les défis et de tirer des enseignements des expériences passées. Permettez-moi, monsieur, s'il vous plaît, permettez-moi de vous énoncer les suggestions suivantes. Premièrement, créer un mécanisme institutionnel permettant au Parlement de gérer les programmes du développement durable 2030, comme la création d'une unité technique ou d'un bureau d'experts, la désignation d'une commission parlementaire pour le développement durable, la mise en réseau avec la société civile et des experts pour le travail du Parlement.
Monsieur, je suis désolé, mais ce n'est pas le moment pour une longue présentation. Là, il faut justement poser une question ou faire un petit commentaire sur les interventions qu'on vient d'entendre. Si vous avez un papier à circuler pour les participants, on sera bien content de le faire après la réunion. Mais j'ai quand même compris bien les 2-3 points clés que vous venez de faire. So let me, since we're running out of time, I have to be very stringent, minute 2 maximum for each question or comment. and then we go to closing. I think I have next Charles Chauvel or UNDP. Charles, are you there? You have to mute yourself.
There we go. Look, thank you very much, Alessandro. Good evening, everybody from Bangkok. Thank you to the IPU and to UNDP colleagues for the event and the presentation. I know you're limited for time, Alessandro, so I want to keep this question or observation brief. I thought Madam Speaker's observation from Trinidad that about the importance of making sure that all revenue flows, irrespective of their origin, be they domestic revenue, tax, excise, what have you, or overseas development assistance, should be, as it were, on the books and subject to parliamentary scrutiny was so important. And I know that that was echoed by a number of the presenters. Some of you may know I was a member of parliament 8 or 9 years ago in an OECD DAC country, and this wasn't universal practice even then across, if you like, developed world parliaments. I'd love to know from participants, if they wanted to perhaps just reply in the chat rather than online, just how much practice is advanced in this area. I think Trinidad is blazing a nice trail here by making sure everything is on the books and subject to proper parliamentary scrutiny, whether it's from overseas or domestic revenue. And it would be great to know if this is becoming much more of a kind of widespread established practice in accordance with the guidelines that we worked on. Thank you, Alessandro. Over.
Thank you, Charles. Now, I recognize South Africa and then the Syrian parliament. South Africa, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, just quickly, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pity that I didn't get the guidelines before coming here, but for listening to the speakers, I think for me, the major concern is the capacity of our approach to development and ensuring the participation of the ordinary people on the ground. And the question that is that I would have loved to have experience of how that could be easily done, because the problems we have in South Africa is that whilst we do encourage participation by ordinary citizens, the bigger problem is that at a lower level, there's more misunderstanding of or lack of understanding of the parliamentary language that is used. But the further you go, because the stakeholders are more coordinated, they are able to participate at that level. The last point I want to raise is really about ensuring, because one of the things that we're looking at is how we use budget to be able to assist in development. And those are the two things I wanted to raise. If they are not topics for discussion, I'll appreciate in another day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very clear. So I'll leave it to one or more of the presenters, maybe to comment on some of these questions. Syria, 1 minute, please. We're really running out of time. You have the floor. Syria, would you have a comment or a question?
Yes, it is a comment, sir. And thank you for our participation also. I salute all of you from Syria, Damascus, from the Syrian parliament. Actually, in Syria, we believe that parliamentarians possess a unique power to bring solutions close to people. And beside our constitutional responsibility, Syrian parliament have an opportunity to play an important role in supporting and also monitoring the implementation of development goals. And actually, we have to focus on the sanctions imposed on Syria that don't allow us to be more efficacious in the effective development cooperation. And also, sir, let me state that we believe that parliaments and parliamentarians must play a significant role in ensuring that development cooperation delivers high quality and sustainable development results for people and countries. And finally, the ability of parliamentarians in development cooperation will depend on improving their capacity, lawmaking, and other things. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. I see the hand up for the speaker of Trinidad. Madam Speaker, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to respond to the concern raised by the member from South Africa. Want to put things in a little greater context is that I think sometimes we underestimate the ground. And what has been our experience is that through we engage the civil society, we engage the citizens electronically through our platforms. So our committee meetings are not just only aired on television, they air on all the social media platforms. We invite comments through our social media platforms. Sometimes we do surveys to get a sense of what people feel. And that's how we engage our wider public. We even help sometimes in asking them through the electronic platform to help us create the inquiry. And, even when a public examination, a public hearing is going on into an issue, I am always surprised at the comments that are either made or the questions that come in from the public that they would ask us to ask, or the information. So it's out there, whether it's in a structured civil society group or NGO, or just from individual lay people. So, when we talk about the ground, I think we know the ground has many levels, but there is a lot of value, understanding, and merit out there from our wider publics.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, the value of technology and how it can be deployed to the purpose of transparency and accountability, as recalled by one of the presenters. I have Petra Bayer. She raised her hand, literally. Petra, I also have a question for you, quickly. You referred to refugees and the aid that goes to refugees. And I want to use that as an example also where there is a lot of confusion and that can be dissipated by reading our guidelines, because refugee-related aid can only be counted as official aid for a portion, I think the first year of assistance. But after that, long-term refugees, that doesn't count as aid anymore. But parliamentarians are often very confused or misled in their way. So anyway, maybe you have a comment on how that actually is going in Austria, but please go ahead. You have your own comments. I'm sorry.
I start with the refugee question. I think the problem is twofold. On the one hand, you are right. The OECD guidelines allow to count the costs for refugee, for transportation, for whatever, for 1 year. That's right. And that's, of course, not foreseeable. You never know before how many refugees will come, how much increase will be then. And for instance, in the years 2015 and 16, our development cooperation grew a lot, but only because of refugees, which is not, of course, effective development cooperation at all. Yeah? And Austria has the tendency to really count everything that's possible to ODA. But what I meant and what I reflected before is that very often development cooperation money is really spent in countries with the countries where many refugees come from to Europe, with the idea if we just spend €1 million here or there, no refugee will come anymore. And that, of course, is stupid. That it's on the one hand, we know that if you empower people to have a little bit more money than nothing, they are much more flexible. They are much more likely to go from one place to another, mostly from the countryside to urban spaces. But it's not at all a mechanism to hold back refugees. And I just try to argue in Austria that with development cooperation, it's impossible to decide about refugee movements. And just 1 minute on the question of the colleague from South Africa. And quite similar to this, to the speaker before me, we had a cooperation project between the Austrian and the Mozambican parliament for some years, where we tried to help do have a good homepage that really, and you are totally right, you have to translate our language that we speak in Parliament. No one of our will understand and will know what we are meaning with what you are saying. So I think it's always a question of how to transfer our policy into a language and into things that people can really understand. And so, for instance, home pages where the budget is very clearly to be read out is very helpful. And also democracy workshops. We start with school children and teach them how democracy, including budgeting, works. And I think that's something we shouldn't do with the kids only, but also with adult people.
Thank you so much, Petra. We are out of time. We're going to lose the interpreter. So let me just say this to conclude. Obviously, we have only scratched the surface of many, many complex issues. There is scope for many more discussions with you to go deeper into some of these issues. You will receive soon from me an invitation to precisely one of such opportunities to participate in a consultation that we're organizing also with our support from our UNDP partners on the 12th of April, in which we're looking at how to measure progress, how to monitor progress in the implementation of development cooperation commitments and principles. So it's going to be a more technical discussion in which you will be asked very practical things, and we will be dissecting some of those things, particularly about the budget process and the making the process for the national development cooperation policies. So you will get this email, and hopefully we're looking for a group of about 20 people to participate in this event. It's about 2 hours. You don't have to prepare anything. There will be a moderator that will ask questions and get you to think and debate. So there will be no other speaker than you simply chatting. And hopefully we'll get a good group of you coming together on these occasions. That will be a next way, the next meeting, if you want to get deeper into some of these issues. And then hopefully we can do more of these webinars in the course of the year. Thank you so much again. It's been wonderful meeting you. I hope next time it will be in person. And so good luck, and thank you again for all your support and your work in your respective parliaments. Goodbye.